Welcome to Norland Stories, where shadows talk and secrets walk. Tonight, a puzzle even Nero, Wolf, can't ignore. Sharpen your whiffs, it's time to enter Wolf's world. They say nothing breaks the peace of Nero Wolf's orchid room, except, maybe, the end of the world. Or the clang of the doorbell during beer hour. It was 6:59 p.m. on a Tuesday, and Wolf was exactly 4.5 sips into his second bottle of Remmers. I had just managed to nudge open the morning paper. Yes, we were running that late when the bell rang. Not once, twice. Like whoever it was wanted to live dangerously. I glanced at Wolf. He exhaled like a martyr. "Archie," he said, not looking up, "if it is a salesman, call Inspector Kramer and report a justifiable homicide." With a sigh that rivaled his, I made my way to the door. "We don't do walk-ins, not at this hour, and not when Wolf's digestive schedule is hanging in a balance." The man on the stoop was dressed like a Wall Street ghost, charcoal suit, crisp shirt, and the expression of someone who had forgotten whether they were alive or dead, and in his gloved hands a small sealed wooden box. "I need Mr. Wolf," he said, voice calm, eyes anything but. "It's about my brother." I raised a brow. Wolf's not a grief counselor. The man didn't blink. "He was buried last week," he said, "but I saw him last night. He spoke to me, and just like that." The box wasn't the most interesting thing on the doorstep anymore. I let him in. 15 steps from the front door to the office. I counted them, mostly because the guy behind me didn't say a word. Just walked like the air was heavier than it should have been. When I opened the door to Wolf's office, he didn't bother rising from his throne behind the desk. Of course not. But his eyes rose just enough to signal irritation, interest, or possibly gas. "Name?" Wolf said flatly. "Clayton Verne." The man replied. "My brother's name was Gavin." "Was?" Wolf asked, gesturing toward the red leather chair. "Mr. Goodwin says he was buried." "That implies he is deceased." Clayton sat down, like the chair might reject him. "He is, or he was. The death certificate's real. I identified the body. We cremated him." Wolf's lips thinned. "Yet you claim to have seen him last night." "Yes, you were sober." Wolf added, "I don't drink." Clayton said, "Just a beat too quickly." I moved to the corner and leaned against the filing cabinet, watching the dance begin. His fingers rested on the wooden box in his lap like it might explode or vanish. Wolf noticed too. "What's in the box?" I asked. He hesitated. "Gavin's watch," he said, lifting the lid with rigid ceremony. Inside was a gold pocket watch, antique, elegant, engraved. He was wearing this, last night. Despite being cremated, Wolf said, dryly. Precisely. Clayton's eyes flicked up, defiant now. He was wearing it, I swear. He walked past me on the west platform at Grand Central. He looked at me, then vanished. Wolf picked up his beer with a sigh, took a slow sip. You've not come for comfort, Mr. Verne. You've come for a solution. Yes, the word was a whisper, wrapped in desperation. And what do you believe, Mr. Verne? Wolf asked that your brother lives, that the corpse in the oven was a stranger, that you're hallucinating. I believe, he said, someone wants me to question reality. I stepped forward. Why? Another pause. Then, because if Gavin is alive, everything I inherited dies with him. That got Wolf's attention. The air in the room had shifted. The game was on. Wolf sent me out like a bloodhound, minus the tail and dignity. My orders were simple. Find out who gains from Gavin Verne staying dead, and who loses if he walks back into the room. First stop, Amelia Carr, former fiancée of the late Gavin Verne. They were supposed to marry last June, but instead of vows and cake, she got a coffin and a contested will. She opened the door in a robe that costs more than my suit and a perfume that could wake the neighbors, Mr. Goodwin. She said, tilting her head like she was deciding whether I was trouble or dessert. You want to talk about Gavin. Most men avoid that. I make a living being inconvenient, I told her. She laughed, just enough to show it used to be genuine. I saw the will. Clayton gets everything. Gavin left me nothing but a locked box and a memory I don't trust anymore. And the box gone. Someone took it 2 nights ago. Along with my sense of safety, one eyebrow arched upward on its own. Did you love him, Miss Carr? She smiled like that was the oldest lie in New York. I loved the version of him I made up. Next stop, Dr. Paul Reiner, family physician, an old friend of the Vernes. Clean cuffs, practiced concern, and the kind of handshake that said he'd sell you vitamins for triple retail. I certified the death, he said. I saw the body myself. Gavin died. Cardiac arrest. No foul play, no mystery. And yet I said, Clayton's seeing ghosts. That's grief or guilt. Or both. You'd be surprised how many people hallucinate the dead. Would I? I smiled. Doctor, did Gavin have any enemies? Someone who might have wanted him out of the way. He didn't blink. Gavin was charming, reckless, and a compulsive liar. That's a dangerous cocktail. Take your pick. The last name on my list, Lana Webb, former business partner. She ran the investment firm that Gavin tanked with a scandal 6 months before his death. Her office had bulletproof glass a wall full of trophies, and a gaze sharp enough to cut marble. "Gavin faked a suicide once," she said. "It wouldn't shock me if he faked a death." "You think he staged the whole thing?" She leaned forward. "I think Gavin played games. Big ones. If he's alive, it means someone helped. If he's dead, someone's doing a damn good impression. And you." "I hated him," she said plainly. "But I wouldn't kill him. I wanted him alive. To rot in court." I nodded. "Nice to meet someone honest." "Don't mistake directness for honesty, Mr. Goodwin," she said. "Especially in my profession." Back at the brownstone, I gave Wolf the rundown. 3 suspects, 3 motives. All different flavors of poison. Wolf grunted, leaned back, and folded his hands. "Someone is lying. Find the lie, Archie. That's where the corpse walks." The rain had started falling in thin, bitter needles by the time I reached the brownstone. My shoes left a trail of Harlem grit on Wolf's Persian rug, and for once he didn't raise a brow. That was how he knew this was real. I dropped my soaked coat over the armchair and said it flat. "Gavin Verne is dead again. For real this time, if he ever wasn't." Wolf didn't look up from his orchids. How tedious. Not for the guy who found him in the boot of a Bentley behind the Fulton Fish Market. 2 bullets in the chest. Same suit he was buried in last week. Now he looked up. He was dug up. He asked, voice like ice over marble, ... Nope. This one was warm. I pulled a wrinkled envelope from my inner pocket, sealed with red wax. This was in his breast pocket, addressed to you. He took it with 2 fingers like it might explode, broke the seal with a bone-handled letter opener. Inside, a single line typed on an underwood in all caps. "You buried the wrong man." Wolf grunted, not the annoyed grunt, the one he makes when something crawls under his skin and takes a seat. "I presume the police are on their way. They found the body 20 minutes ago. Kramer's going to kick the door in any second." Wolf rose slowly and paced 3 steps, which in his world is practically a sprint. "So, someone knew he was alive, knew he'd die again, and wanted me to know about it." He turned. "This is not a case of mistaken identity, Archie. It is a message. Any idea who sent it?" His eyes were nearly gleaming. "Not yet. But someone is playing a long game. And they've just sacrificed a queen." Outside, a siren wailed in the distance, getting closer. Inside, Wolf turned to face the open doorway of his office like a general awaiting war. "Tell Fritz to prepare brandy," he said, and clear. "The schedule. No orchids tomorrow. This is going to take all my gray cells." Wolf sat at his desk, fingers templed. Expression, that of a man asked to wade through sewage in patent leather shoes. This case, he declared, is vulgar, ghastly, and I want no further part in it. I leaned against the doorframe and twirled my hat on one finger. No, Wolf snapped. I am offended because they assumed I would chase shadows like a bloodhound with water on the brain. I am neither a coroner nor a fool. But you are a genius with a grudge, I offered helpfully. And whoever dropped that body wanted to poke the bear. You're telling me you're just going to roll over and go back to pruning orchids. I am telling you, Wolf said, voice rising like a tide, that I have no intention of involving myself in a spectacle fit for tabloid mongers and psychotic dramatists. A man cannot die twice. Either this is a grotesque prank or a pitifully lazy deception. You saw the note. Yes, he hissed. And it was written by someone who believes drama is a substitute for intellect. He stood up, which in Wolf's universe is the equivalent of flipping a table. I refuse to chase cadavers like a grave robber. I am not a ghoul, Archie. I am not some blood-soaked ghoul lured by theatrical absurdities. That? So, I said, because Kramer's downstairs with more questions than patience. And there's a crowd gathering on 35th Street that thinks this brownstone is the Bates Motel. So, unless you plan on hiding in the fridge with the beer and Fritz's pickled onions, enough, Wolf thundered. If the world insists on making a mockery of death, I shall insist on making a mockery of the world. You may inform Inspector Kramer that I will answer his idiotic inquiries after dinner. He sat back down and glared at me like it was my fault the dead wouldn't stay put. I grinned. Now, that's the Wolf I know. It was a receipt, innocuous, crumpled, almost trash. I found it tucked into the inner flap of a well-worn overcoat hanging in the victim's locker at the Lexington Street bathhouse, the one that still carried the scent of eucalyptus and something darker. I nearly missed it. Would have if I hadn't been looking for a cigarette. Archie, Wolf said, when I placed it before him like an offering. You've handed me lint. Look again, I said. The address. Wolf raised an eyebrow, then lowered his eyes. Slowly, deliberately, as if the paper might detonate. Maison d'Argent, he read aloud. That's the tea salon. Near Gramercy Park. Exclusively overpriced, criminally under-seasoned, and closed every Wednesday, I said, except for the one listed on that receipt. The night before the late Mr. Ferris was spotted, post-burial, by a librarian who doesn't lie and doesn't blink. Wolf scowled. The date on this receipt predates the ... second sighting. Plenty of time to set a ghost in motion. Wolf leaned back, steepled fingers returning to their throne. You believe this connects our buried man to the tea salon. I believe someone paid cash, didn't leave a tip, and met someone there who isn't on our radar yet. He was quiet for a beat. Then you will retrieve their guest log, discreetly, meaning illegally, meaning use your charms. They're less expendable than your fingerprints. And if they don't cooperate, Wolf smirked. Then, my dear Archie, lie like the devil and smile like a saint. For the first time in days, the air in the brownstone felt electric again. The shadows had shifted. The dead man had left a breadcrumb, and we were already on the trail. Her name was Eleanor. Red gloves, cheap perfume, and a voice like cracked glass over velvet. She was the kind of woman who drank tea like whiskey and smoked like she was being chased. I found her locking up the back of Mason Dargent, hands shaking as she fumbled with the keys. Her eyes flicked to mine, startled, then resigned. You, she said, the wisecrack with the notebook. Archie Goodwin, I said, tipping my hat. Still wise, still cracking. She lit a cigarette and exhaled smoke like she was purging secrets. I already told the cops everything I know. That's the thing, I said, stepping into her space. You told them a version. Now I want the truth. I'm not. Save it. Nell, I know someone met Ferris here the night before he came back from the dead. I know there's no record of it, but a receipt says otherwise. She froze. Just for a second, like a deer clocking a rifle. There's no receipt. There was, I said, crushed in his coat like a confession. So Nell, who was with him? Who were you protecting? Her eyes welled, but she blinked it away like an insult. You think I'm scared of you, she said. You don't know fear. Try watching someone walk into a cafe who you buried last week. Try pouring tea for a ghost. I didn't say anything. Just let the silence stretch long enough for the guilt to echo. Her hands trembled now. Not from cold. He sat in booth 4. Didn't say a word. Just looked at me like he'd already forgiven me. Forgiven you for what? She took a shaky drag. For not stopping it, she said. Stopping what? But that was all I got. She stubbed the cigarette out with such force, I thought she'd cracked the table. He left something behind, she whispered. Under the seat cushion. I didn't touch it. And, just like that, the ice around her cracked. Not a confession, but a fracture. I had a ghost in a cafe, a woman with blood in her past, and a dead man leaving breadcrumbs from beyond the grave. The case wasn't just strange anymore. It was haunted. There's a particular kind of silence that falls when someone's world splits in half. It happened in Wolf's office at precisely 4:36 p.m. Right after, he said, with glacial calm, Miss Caro is not who she claims to be, Virginia. Caro, dressed in modest beige and a meek little brooch that never quite sat straight, blinked twice. Then, once more, slower. The sort of blink you do when your disguise gets peeled off with garden shears. Pardon me, she said, voice a hair too high. You are not a paralegal, Wolf said, steepling his fingers. You never studied law. You do, however, speak fluent Hungarian, spent 7 years in Bucharest, and have an offshore account under the name Ilona Farkas. She swallowed, but it was too late. Her throat had betrayed her. I leaned against a globe bar and crossed my arms. Funny thing about offshore accounts, Miss Sorry, Ilona. They don't hide as well as they used to. Wolf continued like a freight train through fog. You posed as Ferris's assistant to gain access to the Fenwick estate documents. The forgery on the trust transfer bears your linguistic markers. Your pen strokes betray the habits of a European hand. Ridiculous, she snapped, but it came out cracked, a tremor lacing the vowels. You have no proof. You left proof, Wolf said flatly, in the orchid room. And now her face drained. Oh yes, I added. You bumped the potting tray while snooping through Wolf's files yesterday. The residue matched the soil compound unique to the orchids. Sloppy. She stood, knocking her chair over breath. Short and ragged. You don't understand. I loved him, did you? Wolf said. Or did you love the Fenwick inheritance? Because Ferris was about to change his will again. And there it was. The moment she broke, her shoulders sagged, as if the scaffolding of her story had collapsed. Her voice turned dull, bitter. He was going to leave it all to his sister. Said he was tired of pretending that we were fake. What about his reappearance? I asked. Did you see him? She looked up, tears threatening but not falling. No, she said. That was someone else's game. I buried him. I know he's dead. A double life, a fake name, a forged will. The masks were falling fast, and behind them, no one was who they claimed to be. The second body showed up, face down in the East River. Name, Milton Crane. Occupation, night watchman. At the Fenwick Textile Warehouse. Known for chain smoking, bad poetry, and a record Wolf once referred to as impressively unimpressive. But dead men tend to climb the ranks in importance, especially when they're found with their pockets turned out and a strip of Fenwick. Letterhead in one fist, half torn, half burned. I got the call from Lon Cohen at the Gazette. Archie, he said, voice hushed like the city was listening in. Crane's dead. Shot once, close range. Someone wanted to shut him up. He talked much, I asked. He started. He never got to finish. I related to Wolf over breakfast, poached eggs, beer, sour face included. Phewie, he muttered. A warehouse guard. This case is devolving. Someone thought he mattered, I said. Enough to kill him. That shut him up, but not for long. The doorbell rang. 20 minutes later, Inspector Kramer. Red-faced and out for blood. You know anything about a stiff in the river? He barked. Wolf didn't stand. Of course. My knowledge, he said, is proportional to what's shared. And the NYPD is, as always, stingy. Kramer shoved a file on Wolf's desk. Crane's time card says he clocked in early the night. Ferris supposedly died. We think he saw something. Maybe someone, I said. You mean someone who wasn't dead? Kramer's eyes narrowed. Don't get cute, Goodwin. But the room had changed. Wolf's fingers tapped, restless. His shoulders tensed, a detail most wouldn't catch. But I knew what it meant. The pace was accelerating. Someone else had just paid the price for secrets. And Wolf, for all his bluster, knew the noose was tightening. He hated being hurried. But time was no longer on our side. Wolf was staring at a receipt, not a letter, not a blood-stained scarf, not a smoking gun. A receipt, browned, crumpled, and barely legible, from a diner 3 blocks from the cemetery. I handed it to him an hour ago, dug up from the personal effects of Milton Crane, the second body in our newly expanded cast of corpses. At the time, I figured it was just another meal for the file. But Wolf hadn't said a word for 10 minutes, and that's dangerous. He lifted the slip between 2 fingers like it was a Fabergé egg. Mr. Goodwin. He said slowly, eyes never leaving it. You missed the only thing of importance you've delivered all week. I took a stab. He had pie and coffee. Wolf's eyes twinkled, just barely. The receipt is dated, he said, July 3rd. Sure. So, the timestamp says 11:06 p.m. I waited. He dropped the bomb with a flourish. Crane was on shift at Fenwick Warehouse at that time. His log says he clocked in at 10:30. I blinked. So either he skipped out, ... or someone wanted us to think he didn't. Wolf leaned back, folding his arms with immense satisfaction. Sloppy amateurs lie. But only the brilliant and the idiotic forge timestamps. I whistled. Lo, you think Crane wasn't there that night? I think, Wolf said, he was with someone else. And that someone is running out of time. The air was changing again. Wolf was smiling, faint but smug. The kind of smile he wore just before dropping a name, an accusation, or an entire house of cards. He rang for Fritz and demanded another bottle of beer. Then he told me to fetch our remaining suspects. I knew the look. Wolf's mind had already solved the thing. He was just waiting for the room to fill, so he could take a bow. The front door thundered open like Judgment Day. Lieutenant Kramer didn't bother with niceties. He marched in with 2 uniforms in tow and murder in his eyes. His cigar was clenched so hard I thought it might splinter. "I don't need your permission, Wolf," he barked. "This is official." Wolf didn't look up from his glass of beer. "I was unaware your department still considered arrests to be official." Kramer waved a sheet of paper like it was the 10 Commandments. "We got an eyewitness. Said they saw Lydia Fenwick leaving the scene the night Crane died. She had motive, no alibi, and now a witness. That's more than enough." From the set of Wolf's mouth, I could tell he was already savoring this. "Lydia Fenwick," Wolf said, "couldn't have killed Milton Crane. She was at St. Jude's Infirmary, which you would have discovered had you spoken to anyone there. Broken wrist, courtesy of a tennis racket and her own unfortunate backhand." Kramer flushed. "So, the nurse got it wrong." "No," Wolf interrupted. "You did. As usual." One of the uniforms shifted uncomfortably. Lydia, seated quietly beside the bookshelf, looked stunned but suspicious, like she'd just been acquitted and accused in the same breath. "But the witness," Kramer began, "wouldn't know Lydia Fenwick from Eleanor Roosevelt," Wolf said. "They saw a blonde woman in a blue coat. You'll find half a dozen of those in any given hour on Madison." Wolf tapped the now infamous receipt on the desk. "Your killer left fingerprints at the diner. Not Lydia's, but someone else's. He didn't say who, not yet, but his eyes flicked to one of the guests standing stiff in the room. And they noticed. Oh, they noticed." Kramer swore under his breath and jabbed his cigar at Wolf. "Fine, but if you're wrong, I'm not," Wolf said. "And you're welcome." Wolf didn't stand up. He didn't raise his voice. He just said, "Archie, go to the Broadway storage facility. Unit 3C. The key is inside the copy of Persian Orchids behind the cover leaf. You have exactly 1 hour." That was it. No please, no be careful, no hint of what I was walking into. Classic Wolf. I was in the Heron sedan 10 minutes later, barreling across town like the devil had borrowed a taxi cab. Rain smeared the windshield in streaks, and the city glared at me through neon and grit. Broadway storage was one of those places, with buzzing lights and enough mildew to start its own civilization. The clerk gave me a look like I owed him money, but the key worked. Unit 3C opened with a creak like a haunted mausoleum, and what was inside? A single, battered trunk, locked. Naturally, I jimmied it open with a screwdriver I'd borrowed from the glove compartment. What I found made my stomach do a somersault and land on its back. Inside were three things: a man's travel bag, monogrammed MCA pair of black leather gloves, still dusty with graveyard dirt, and a photo, grainy, faded, but unmistakable. Milton Crane, standing next to our witness, arm around her. Both of them grinning like lottery winners. Stamped on the back. July 3rd, 3 days after his funeral. I stared at it for a full minute. Heart-pounding Crane hadn't just faked his death. He'd planned for someone else to die in his place, and Wolf, damn him, had known. I slid the photo into my pocket, locked the unit, and burned rubber back to the brownstone. The game was over, but Wolf hadn't even started talking. Yet, you haven't lived until you've seen a murderer sweat under the weight of Wolf's gaze at precisely 8 p.m. Wolf's office was packed tighter than a Broadway matinee. The cast included Eloise Crane, widow, in a veil that did a poor job hiding her nerves. Dr. Rittenhouse, pretending he wasn't sweating through his collar. Gerald Finch, the lawyer, poker-faced but blinking too often. L.T. Kramer, arms folded, jaw clenched like a bear trap, and Miss Juno Bellamy, the grieving friend, seated near the orchids, but far from comfortable. Wolf, of course, hadn't moved an inch from his chair. He folded his hands over his stomach and began with all the ceremony of a judge. Passing sentence. The man who was buried a week ago was not Milton Crane. He said, simply. You could hear the collective intake of breath like someone had opened a vacuum seal. He was a drifter, a transient, drugged and killed in Crane's apartment. His face was ruined in a fire started after the fact, intentionally. Finch stiffened. Eloise looked like she might faint. The plan was elegant. Milton Crane disappears, is buried, and leaves behind a grieving widow, a clean slate, with access to his own estate, and no police breathing down his neck. Wolf turned slightly to face Miss Bellamy. But then you saw him, didn't you, Miss Bellamy? In Paris, 5 days ago. Her eyes flashed, but she didn't speak. You told Eloise, and suddenly our grieving widow hires us, not to find her husband, to silence his shadow. Archie cut in. Of course, Eloise couldn't say she'd seen a dead man, so she danced around it. Cryptic phone calls, mysterious envelopes. Wolf was supposed to poke around just enough to scare Crane away for good. Kramer's voice came, low and dangerous. You knew he was alive. Eloise trembled. Wolf continued. Then someone killed the drifter's brother to protect the illusion? That was your mistake. He gestured, and I stepped forward, laying the photograph on the desk. Taken 3 days after the funeral. Milton Crane, with Miss Bellamy. Finch stood. That proves nothing. Sit down, Mr. Finch. Wolf said. You orchestrated the legal mechanics, but you didn't plan on Juno's guilt or her keeping souvenirs. I added the gloves with grave dirt. From when you buried the decoy, they were in your storage unit. Miss Bellamy broke then. I didn't know he'd go that far, she said, voice shaking. He told me it was just to escape debts. That no one would get hurt, Wolf sighed. When people fake their debts, someone always gets hurt. The dead don't stay quiet forever. Kramer moved like a man waking from a trance. Finch, on your feet. Finch didn't argue. Eloise tried to speak, but Wolf held up one hand. Madam, I suggest you remain silent. For once, it might save your skin. As the room emptied, Wolf leaned back and closed his eyes. Phewie, he muttered. The living are infinitely more tedious than the dead. After the last echo of the front door faded, and the parquet stopped shivering from Kramer's boots, the brownstone exhaled. Silence slid back into its usual haunts, curling up in corners, stretching across the Persian rugs. Wolf hadn't moved, eyes closed, lips pressed, looking more like a carved idol than a man who just unraveled fraud, murder, and an identity swap over a glass of beer. I stood by the window, watching the street. Rain had started, soft, persistent, the kind that smears the city like a watercolor. You know, I said, if I ever fake my own death, I'll pick something easier, like drowning in quicksand. Wolf grunted. You would lack the foresight to tie your own shoelaces without strangling yourself. Touché, I lit a cigarette. Outside, a cab rolled by, its headlamps catching the rain like glass needles. The headlines would hit tomorrow. Lawyer arrested in fake death scheme. Widow implicated. Some editor would stretch it out into 3 columns. But the real story, the one where grief, greed, guilt, and orchids intersect, that one would stay here, inside this house. Like so many others before it, Wolf finally opened his eyes. Archie. Dinner. Just like that, the case was over. We didn't toast our victories around here. We filed them between the orchids and the bitter beer. Somewhere behind Wolf's 3rd favorite chair and my 6th broken shoelace, because, in this business, the dead rarely stay buried, and the living, they always have something to hide.